Content note: this episode involves a real long-term missing person case and touches on mental health and possible self-harm. Please listen with care and be respectful in any discussion or comments. It's still dark when the first driver sees the damage. They're heading toward Castaic Lake in the early morning hours, headlights cutting across the empty access road. Off to the side, the beam catches something that doesn't belong: broken fence, torn dirt, a fresh path carved straight down a steep embankment. At the bottom, an SUV lies on its side in the ravine. The front end is crumpled. The rear window is smashed out. The inside looks wrong, not like a car that's been ransacked, but like one that was simply left. A phone. A wallet. A laptop. Clothes and a duffel bag. A little bit of blood. Not enough to suggest a fatal crash. Enough to prove someone was hurt. The driver calls it in. When officers arrive, they climb down to the wreck and shine their flashlights inside. There's no one trapped, no one thrown clear, no footprints leading obviously away from the car. Just a silent vehicle, resting on its side at the bottom of a ravine near a lake most people only ever see on postcards or speeding past on the interstate. Whoever drove this car is gone. You're listening to Fear Files, Real Cases. Dark Details. Tonight, we're on the interstate between Northern and Southern California, following a drive that should have taken about 7 hours and instead turned into a 30-hour mystery that still hasn't ended. This is the disappearance of 19-year-old college student Bryce David Laspisa, whose 2003 Toyota Highlander was found wrecked near Castaic Lake on August 30, 2013, his belongings still inside, his trail going cold in a place he'd never been before. Who Bryce was. Before he became a missing poster, Bryce was a kid a lot of people would have recognized. He was born in Illinois and grew up in the suburbs near Chicago, graduating from Naperville Central High School in 2012. Friends and family described him as outgoing and artistic, with bright red hair, green eyes, and a big, easy smile. He liked video games, hanging out with friends, and working on art projects. In 2012, his parents, Karen and Michael, moved west to Laguna Niguel in Orange County, California, and Bryce went with them. Not long after, he enrolled at Sierra College, a community college near Sacramento, to study graphic and industrial design. He seemed to settle in quickly, meeting a girlfriend, making close friends, and doing well enough in his first year that nothing looked particularly alarming from the outside. But by late August of his sophomore year, people close to him began to notice changes. According to those friends and later reporting, Bryce had been drinking heavily and taking the prescription stimulant Vyvanse, sometimes mixing it with alcohol and staying up all night gaming. His girlfriend and roommate both said his behavior shifted fast. He seemed exhausted, distant, and not like himself. He also started giving things away. Diamond earrings. His Xbox. Personal items you don't usually hand off on a whim. When people asked why, he brushed it off. The week everything changed. The last week of August 2013 is where the story starts to spiral. On August 27th and 28th, just days into the new semester, Bryce's girlfriend noticed he was acting strange enough that she became worried. He reportedly told her he wanted to break up, and when she pushed back, he didn't give a clear reason. Around the same time, he told his roommate that the world would be better without him, a statement that set off alarms for the people who heard it later. On August 28th, Bryce called his mom from school. The call wasn't long, but it was unsettling. He reportedly told her there was a lot he needed to talk about and that he had something important to share, but he wouldn't say what it was over the phone. He promised they'd talk in person soon. Instead of staying on campus that night, Bryce got in his SUV and started driving south. His parents say they didn't know at first that he'd left the Rocklin area. What should have been a straightforward overnight trip from near Sacramento to Laguna Niguel, about 450 miles, mostly straight down I-5, turned into something much stranger. Buttonwillow, the long pause. The next day, August 29th, is where the timeline gets deeply unsettling. Sometime that morning, Bryce stops near Buttonwillow, a small town off I-5 in the Central Valley. He runs out of gas at a rest area or exit nearby and uses his roadside assistance to call for help. A local driver named Christian brings a few gallons of fuel. The charge shows up on Bryce's parents' credit card, and Christian later tells them Bryce seemed quiet but basically okay, maybe a little red-eyed and tired. Karen, now aware that her son is in Buttonwillow, calls him and urges him to keep driving home. He says he will. Hours pass. By mid-afternoon, they still haven't seen him. When they check Bryce's phone location with their carrier, they realize he hasn't gotten very far at all. After roughly 9 hours, he's still in the same general area, moving only a handful of miles. That's when his parents involve law enforcement. California Highway Patrol officers go to check on him. They find him still near Buttonwillow, sitting in his SUV. They talk with him, search the car, administer basic sobriety checks. According to reports, he passes the tests and doesn't appear intoxicated or overtly impaired. They conclude he's safe to drive and encourage him to call his parents. Bryce talks to his mom again and promises, again, that he's heading home. He buys a small drink at a nearby gas station. Security camera footage puts him there that evening. Then he gets back on the interstate. By this point, what should have been a half-day trip has already stretched toward 20 hours, most of it spent in or around a town his parents had never heard of before. The last calls. In the early hours of August 30th, Karen and Michael are still awake. Around 1:50 a.m., Bryce calls and tells his mom he's on I-5, but when she asks where, he says it's too dark to read any signs. It's an odd answer for a major interstate. About 20 minutes later, around 2:08 a.m., he calls again and says he's getting off the freeway in a suburban area and plans to pull over and sleep in his car. He'll make the rest of the drive in the morning. It's the kind of decision that sounds responsible. I'm tired, I'll stop. Karen agrees. They say goodnight. It's the last confirmed contact anyone has with Bryce. The ravine. Just a few hours later, at around 5:30 a.m. on August 30th, officers responding to a call find Bryce's beige Toyota Highlander in a ravine off Lake Hughes Road, near the main boat launch access to Castaic Lake, about 90 minutes north of his parents' home. The SUV has gone through a guardrail and down an embankment estimated between 15 and 25 feet. The pattern of tire tracks suggests acceleration, not braking, as if the vehicle picked up speed going toward the edge instead of trying to stop. The car is on its side. The rear window has been broken outward, apparently from inside. There is blood in the car, but not the amount you'd expect from a fatal crash. His laptop, phone, wallet, and most of his belongings are still inside. His duffel bag sits just outside the vehicle. Different sources disagree on whether his ID was inside his wallet or missing from it. What's clear is that nothing about the scene screams robbery. Nearby security footage from the recreation area later shows Bryce's SUV driving up the access road more than once in the hour or two before the crash, looping through the area as if he were hesitating at the edge of a decision. But when searchers fan out from the wreck, there's no Bryce. No obvious footprints leading into the hills. No body in or near the vehicle. Just a smashed-through guardrail, a wrecked SUV, and a terrifying question. What happened in that gap between 2:08 a.m., when Bryce said he was going to pull over and sleep, and 5:30 a.m., when his empty car was found at the bottom of a ravine? The search at Castaic Lake. Law enforcement treats the situation as urgent from the start. Ground teams spread out around the crash site. Helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft search from the air. Dive teams go into Castaic Lake, working with sonar and underwater cameras to look for any sign that Bryce went into the water. Nothing turns up. Because there's some blood at the scene, the possibility of a head injury is taken seriously. Maybe he's walking around disoriented. Maybe he wandered off in the dark and got lost in rough terrain. Search dogs are brought in. Bloodhounds follow a scent they believe is Bryce's from the wreck site up toward the road, across the dam, and toward a nearby truck stop. There, the scent trail simply stops. There are no obvious signs of a struggle, no scattered items, no big blood trail, just an empty space where the dogs refuse to go farther. For some investigators, that suggests he may have gotten a ride, willingly or not. While all this is unfolding, Bryce's parents race to the area and begin doing what families of missing people do, handing out flyers, talking to local media, and walking the ground themselves. They set up a Find Bryce page and try to keep his face circulating far beyond Castaic. 5 days after the crash, a separate horror briefly collides with their nightmare. A cyclist finds a burning body near Castaic Lake. For a short window of time, everyone waits to hear if it's Bryce. The remains turn out to be a different man, the victim of an unrelated murder case. Years later, a skull is found near Templin Highway, not far from the lake. Once again, investigators test it. Once again, it's not Bryce. 11 years on, there's still no confirmed physical trace of him beyond the small amount of blood in his car. What was going on with Bryce? When you zoom out from the day of the crash and look back at the weeks before, a pattern starts to emerge, and it's one that has kept this case alive in forums, podcasts, and news segments for more than a decade. Friends and his girlfriend later described Bryce's behavior in August 2013 as increasingly worrying. He was drinking heavily, bottles of hard liquor, not just beers, and taking Vyvanse, a prescription stimulant used for ADHD, which can have serious side effects when misused or combined with alcohol. He seemed sleep deprived, sometimes staying up all night to play video games. He suddenly started giving away belongings that mattered to him, gaming systems, jewelry, things with real monetary and sentimental value. To people who study suicide risk, that kind of giving away can be a red flag. To a 19-year-old's friends, it might just look confusing until hindsight kicks in. At the same time, Bryce was telling different people different things. To his girlfriend, he wanted to end the relationship. To his roommate, cryptic comments about the world being better without him. To his parents, there was something important he needed to tell them, but he'd do it in person. We still don't know what that something was. Theories: what might have happened? With almost no physical evidence beyond the crash itself, theories about what happened to Bryce fall into a few broad categories. None can be proved with what's publicly available. All of them have serious problems. 1. Death by suicide. The most straightforward theory is that Bryce was in a mental health crisis, intentionally drove off the embankment in an attempt to die, survived the crash, and then found another way to end his life, possibly in or near the lake or in the surrounding hills. The tire marks suggesting acceleration and the repeated loops toward the access road support the idea that he made a deliberate decision to go over the edge. The recent heavy drinking, stimulant use, sleep deprivation, relationship stress, and giving away of possessions all fit risk factors for suicide. But no body has ever been found, despite extensive searches and the fact that remains are often eventually discovered in that kind of terrain. Castaic Lake has been searched multiple times. If he died by suicide in the water near the crash site, you'd expect at least some physical evidence by now. That doesn't mean it's impossible, just that it's not a clean fit. 2. Accidental death, disorientation. Another theory is that Bryce survived the crash, exited through the back window, and wandered away in a state of shock, concussion, or drug-related confusion. In this version, he collapses somewhere out of sight and dies from exposure, dehydration, or injuries that didn't look immediately life-threatening. The problem is similar: no remains, no clothing, no backpack, nothing found in more than a decade of searching, hiking, and development in the area. For an accidental death this close to roads and a popular recreation area, the total lack of trace is hard to explain, but nature and time can sometimes hide people more effectively than we like to admit. 3. Voluntary disappearance. Investigators have reportedly at times categorized Bryce as voluntarily missing, suggesting they consider it possible that he chose to walk away from his life. In this theory, the crash is either an aborted suicide attempt or a kind of symbolic break. He takes his ID, leaves behind his phone, wallet, and laptop so they can't track him easily, and uses the nearby truck stop as a point to catch a ride, maybe with a trucker, maybe with someone else, heading anywhere else. Supporters of this theory point to the bloodhound trail to the truck stop and the lack of his belongings beyond that point. They also point out that, as a young adult, he might have felt overwhelmed by family expectations, school, or relationship issues and decided to start over somewhere far away. The problem: walking away from your life is hard to do completely in the modern world, especially when your face has been on national TV, featured in major podcasts, and age progressed by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. There have been unconfirmed tips over the years, a possible sighting in Oregon, mentions from people who swear they've seen someone who looks like Bryce, but nothing law enforcement has been able to verify. 4. Foul play. The last main category is that Bryce survived the crash and made it as far as the truck stop, and then encountered someone who meant him harm. Long-haul truck routes, lonely roads, and rest areas in the middle of the night are common settings in both real crimes and true crime narratives for a reason. If Bryce, confused or injured, got into a vehicle with the wrong person, it could help explain why his scent trail stops there and why no trace of him has been found nearby. But there's no specific suspect, no known altercation, and no physical evidence pointing clearly to an abduction or murder. It's a theory built mostly on absence: no body at the lake, no sign in the hills, no movement on his own accounts. What's left behind? What we're left with, more than a decade later, is a tangle of facts and a painful lack of closure. A bright, artistic 19-year-old leaves campus, drives hundreds of miles, spends nearly a full day within a few miles of a tiny Central Valley town, talks to his parents and police multiple times, then somehow ends up in a ravine near a lake in the middle of the night, his car wrecked, his phone and wallet left behind, his trail vanishing into thin air. His parents have kept his case alive, pushing for coverage and organizing searches year after year. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has released updated age-progressed images, trying to show what Bryce might look like now in his late 20s and early 30s. Sometimes, when you look at those images side by side, the teenager with bright red hair and the digital rendering of the man he might be now, you feel the weight of all those missing years in between. Years he could have spent finishing school, making art, changing his mind, calling home. If you know something. If you've ever driven that stretch of I-5, you know how empty it can feel at night, long black ribbons of road, truck stops glowing like islands, exit signs you barely notice as you fly past. But someone was there. Someone may have seen a red-haired kid in a checkered shirt, standing alone near a truck stop or walking away from a wrecked SUV. Someone might have given a ride to a young man who seemed confused, upset, or like he'd just survived something he didn't want to talk about. If you have any credible information about the disappearance of Bryce David Laspisa, something you saw that night near Castaic Lake, something you heard later, or anything that connects clearly to this case, contact the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department or your local law enforcement agency. Tips about missing persons can also be shared through the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Do not attempt your own search or confrontation. Bring what you know to people who can investigate it safely. Closing. The next time you're on a long highway drive at night, passing empty exits and stretches of dark hills, think about this. From the outside, a missing person case can look like a mystery to be solved. From the inside, it's an unfinished conversation. A son who said he had something important to tell his parents. A drive that was supposed to end with a hug at the front door. A wrecked car in a ravine and a trail that stops at the edge of a truck stop parking lot. Until someone comes forward with the piece that fits, Bryce's story stays stuck in that space between 2 points on the map, Rockland and Laguna Niguel, campus and home, the last phone call and the empty SUV at the bottom of the hill. Somewhere between all of those, a young man went missing. And for his family, the road to nowhere is the one they have to keep walking. This has been Fear Files, Real Cases, Dark Details.